We all think we know the tales of Greek mythology, heroic deeds, powerful gods, and epic adventures. We've heard of Hercules and his 12 labors, and Odysseus and his long journey home. These stories have been told and retold, often sanitized for modern audiences. But what about the other stories? The ones so shocking and gruesome that they were nearly erased from history. Today, we're not diving into tales of heroes. Instead, we're uncovering the myths the ancient Greeks didn't want you to hear. These hidden histories, buried deep within classical texts, reveal a much darker, more terrifying side to their gods and mortals. We'll explore the story of a king condemned to an eternity of tantalizing starvation, a punishment that's a perfect poetic form of cruelty. And we'll uncover the horrifying tale of how the very first werewolf came to be, born from a bloody defiance of Zeus himself. These are the most disturbing myths the ancient Greeks ever told. Let's begin our descent into darkness in the wild ancient lands of Arcadia. This rugged, mountainous kingdom was ruled by a man named Lycaon. Now, Lycaon wasn't just any king. He was known for being fiercely intelligent, cunning, and deeply impious. He viewed the rituals and sacrifices his people made to the gods not as acts of devotion, but as foolish superstitions. In his pride, he believed that the gods, if they even existed, weren't worthy of his respect. This was a dangerous belief, especially since Zeus, the king of the gods, had a habit of testing mortals by walking among them in disguise. One day, Zeus decided to pay a visit to Arcadia. He veiled his divine form, taking on the appearance of a weary traveler to see if the rumors of the Arcadians' wickedness were true. As he entered the kingdom, signs of his divinity rippled through the land, and the common people, sensing the presence of a god, began to pray. But King Lycaon was unimpressed. He scoffed at their piety and decided to devise a definitive test to expose this traveler as a fraud. He was determined to prove that this so-called god was just a mere mortal. His plan was one of breathtaking cruelty and sacrilege. It was an act so profoundly taboo that it shattered the most sacred laws of hospitality and humanity. Lycaon decided he would serve his divine guest a meal made of human flesh. Some versions of the myth, especially the one told by the Roman poet Ovid in his Metamorphoses, say he slaughtered a hostage. Others, even darker tellings, whisper that he murdered his own son, Nyctimus, mixing the boy's entrails with roasted meat. The goal was the same, to see if the all-knowing Zeus could tell the difference. That evening, a great feast was held in Lycaon's palace. The tables were laden with food, wine flowed freely, and the court buzzed with tense anticipation. Zeus, still in his humble disguise, took his seat at the king's table, and then it was brought out, the final, horrific dish. The roasted flesh served on a silver platter. Lycaon watched with a smug, defiant grin, waiting for the traveler to take a bite, to fail the test, and reveal himself as a mere mortal. He had catastrophically miscalculated. Zeus, the king of the gods, knew instantly. A wave of divine, incandescent rage washed over him, a fury unlike anything the mortal world had ever seen. He didn't just get angry, he became vengeance itself. With a single gesture, he flipped the table, sending the horrific meal crashing to the floor. With a thunderclap that shook the palace to its foundations, he leveled the entire structure, burying Lycaon's sycophantic sons in the rubble. Terrified, Lycaon fled the burning ruins of his home. He ran into the desolate silence of the countryside, his mind screaming with the realization of his fatal error. But he couldn't outrun a god's wrath. As he ran, a horrifying transformation began to take hold. His panicked screams morphed into guttural howls. His fine royal clothes shredded and melted away, becoming a coarse, gray coat of fur. His arms and legs twisted and warped, his hands and feet hardening into gnarled paws with vicious claws. His face elongated into a terrifying snout, his jaws filled with razor-sharp fangs, dripping with a foam of eternal rage and hunger. He had been turned into a wolf. But this was no ordinary beast. The curse laid upon him by Zeus was that he would retain his human mind, his memories, his consciousness. He was trapped forever inside the body of a predator, consumed by a bloodlust he could never fully satisfy. He was Lycaon, the man-wolf, the first werewolf. His story became a chilling warning, passed down through generations. Don't test the gods. Hubris does not go unpunished, and the punishment is often far worse than death. It's a transformation into the very monster you revealed yourself to be. Challenging a god's divinity is one thing, but betraying their trust after being welcomed as an equal, that earns a special kind of punishment. A punishment of exquisite, eternal cruelty, designed to mock the criminal for all time. This is the story of King Tantalus, a man who flew closer to the sun than any other mortal and was cast into the deepest, darkest pit for his arrogance. Tantalus was a king of immense wealth and power, but his greatest privilege was unique. He was a son of Zeus, and he was so favored by the gods that he was regularly invited to Mount Olympus to dine at their table. He feasted on their food, nectar and ambrosia, which conferred immortality and everlasting youth. He listened to their divine gossip. He was, for all intents and purposes, one of them, treated not as a subject, but as a friend. But like so many tragic figures in Greek myth, this incredible privilege curdled into unforgivable hubris. Tantalus began to see himself not as a guest of the gods, but as their equal. He started small, stealing some ambrosia and nectar to share with his mortal friends back on Earth, hoping to impress them with his divine connections. He'd overhear the secret plans of the gods and leak them to other mortals. These were serious offenses, but they paled in comparison to the abomination he would commit next. His ego had become so inflated that he began to doubt the gods he dined with. Were they truly all-knowing, or were they just powerful beings he could outsmart? Like Lycaon, he decided to devise a test, and like Lycaon, his test involved a feast. But Tantalus's crime was somehow even more personal, more monstrous. He didn't kill a stranger or a prisoner. He murdered his own beloved son, Pelops. He took the boy, ended his life, and used his remains to prepare a feast. Then, with unsettling confidence, he traveled to Olympus and served this twisted dish to the gods, blending it in among the other offerings. He watched with a cold smile, waiting to see if the divine beings would recognize the horrifying truth behind their meal. His goal, to prove that a mortal could deceive the gods themselves. The deception didn't last long. The gods instantly sensed something was terribly wrong, all except one, the goddess Demeter. Overwhelmed by sorrow from the loss of her daughter Persephone, she was too distracted to notice. In her grief, she tasted the dish and unknowingly took part in the horror. The fury of the gods was swift and total. They were not just angry at the test. They were appalled by the violation, the act of a father sacrificing his own child to satisfy his ego. They collected the pieces of Pelops from the stew and, through their divine power, boiled them again in a sacred cauldron, bringing the boy back to life. The fates themselves respun the thread of his life, and Poseidon, taking pity on the resurrected boy, replaced his missing shoulder with a piece of gleaming magical ivory. Pelops was reborn, more handsome and noble than before. Then the gods turned their full, unified wrath upon Tantalus. For his crime, he was condemned to the lowest depths of the underworld, the pit of eternal punishment known as Tartarus, and his punishment was a masterpiece of divine irony. He was made to stand for eternity in a pool of crystal-clear water up to his chin. Yet whenever he bent his head, desperate to quench his parching thirst, the water would recede, turning to dry, cracked mud at his feet. Directly above his head hung the branches of a magnificent fruit tree, laden with the most beautiful, ripe pears, pomegranates, and sweet figs. Yet whenever he reached up, his fingers just inches away from the life-giving fruit, a gust of wind would sweep the branches just out of his reach. He was to spend all of eternity, surrounded by the very things that could save him, yet never able to touch them. He was condemned to perpetual starvation and maddening thirst, forever tantalized by relief that was always just an inch away. In fact, his fate is the very origin of our word tantalize. Hercules. His crime was feeding his son to the gods. His punishment was to never feed himself again. And the horror didn't end with him. His monstrous act placed a curse upon his entire family, the House of Atreus, which would be haunted by murder, incest, and betrayal for generations to come. The crimes of Lycaon and Tantalus were born from pride and hubris, the desire of a mortal to prove himself equal to the gods. But our final myth, perhaps the most foundational of all disturbing Greek tales, springs from a different, more primal emotion: fear. The all-consuming terror of a father so paranoid about being replaced by his own children that he would commit an act that would define the very creation of the Olympian pantheon. This is the story of the Titan king, Cronus. Before Zeus, before the Olympians ruled the cosmos from their mountain peak, there was the age of the Titans. These were the primordial gods, raw and powerful, and their king was Cronus. But Cronus hadn't inherited his throne peacefully. He had taken it by force, ambushing his own father, the sky god Uranus, and violently overthrowing him to seize power. As Uranus fell, he cursed his son, uttering a chilling prophecy. Just as Cronus had overthrown his own father, he too would be overthrown by one of his own children. This prophecy became a poison in Cronus's mind. It twisted him, consuming him with a deep and abiding paranoia. He ruled the cosmos, yet he lived in constant, gnawing fear of the children he hadn't even had yet. His wife, the Titaness Rhea, soon began to bear him children. These were to be the first of a new generation of gods. First came Hestia, then Demeter and Hera, then Hades and Poseidon. They were beautiful, divine beings, destined for greatness. But Cronus, utterly gripped by his terror, saw them only as threats. So, as each child was born, he would take the newborn infant from Rhea's arms, open his monstrous mouth, and swallow the baby whole, imprisoning them deep within his own divine stomach. Imagine the unending horror for Rhea, to go through the pain of childbirth only to have her child immediately consumed by its own father. One after another, 5 of her children were lost to this cycle of birth and monstrous cannibalism, all to satisfy her husband's crippling fear. When her 6th child was due to be born, Rhea knew she couldn't bear it again. Heartbroken and desperate, she fled to the island of Crete and gave birth in secret to a son, whom she named Zeus. To trick her paranoid husband, she found a large oblong stone about the size of a newborn baby. She wrapped the stone tightly in swaddling clothes and presented it to Cronus. Blinded by his fear and haste, Cronus didn't even look. He seized the bundle and swallowed the stone in a single gulp, believing he had once again averted the prophecy. Zeus was raised in secret, hidden away in a cave on Crete, nurtured and protected until he grew into a powerful young god. When he finally came of age, he was ready to claim his destiny. With the help of the Titaness of cunning Metis, he devised a plan. They concocted a potion of mustard and wine and disguised it as a celebratory drink. Zeus, in the guise of a royal cupbearer, served the potion to his father. The effect was immediate and violent. Cronus was seized by powerful convulsions and began to retch uncontrollably. First, he vomited up the stone he had swallowed so many years ago, and then, one by one, he disgorged his other children. Out they came, not as infants, but fully grown and armed, having matured inside their father's divine gut. Poseidon with his trident, Hades with his helm of darkness, and their sisters, Hestia, Hera, and Demeter. Their first breath of freedom was filled with a righteous fury for the father who had imprisoned them. The prophecy had come true. The children of Cronus, led by their savior Zeus, immediately rose up and waged a cataclysmic 10-year war against their father and the Titans, a war known as the Titanomachy. In the end, the new gods were victorious. Zeus overthrew his father, just as Uranus had predicted, and cast him and the other loyal Titans into the eternal pit of Tartarus. This foundational story of the Greek pantheon, the very tale of their rise to power, is born from an act of paranoia-fueled serial cannibalism. The world of the shining Olympians was built upon a truly disturbing foundation of a father eating his own children. These stories of Lycaon, Tantalus, and Cronus remind us that Greek mythology isn't just about heroic quests and noble gods. It's filled with twisted, dark, and frankly disturbing tales that have been glossed over by time. They reveal the ancient Greeks' understanding of the world and the gods who ruled it. it. These weren't benevolent, forgiving deities. They were powerful, prideful, and capable of unimaginable cruelty. Their punishments weren't just, they were poetic, designed to reflect the horror of the crime itself. These tales serve as potent cautionary warnings about the deepest of human flaws, the destructive nature of pride, the poison of betrayal, and the corrosive power of fear. They show that for the ancient Greeks, the greatest monsters weren't always beasts with claws and fangs, but sometimes the ones that looked just like us, or even worse, the ones they worshipped as gods. If you've made it this far, you're clearly just as fascinated by the dark side of mythology as we are. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you won't miss our next deep dive into ancient legends.